The kitchen clock showed 11:42 p.m. when my phone buzzed against the granite countertop. I'd been sitting there in the dark for 20 minutes, nursing a lukewarm coffee and watching the city lights blur through our floor-to-ceiling windows. Boston looked peaceful from the 32nd floor of Harbor Towers, but peace was the last thing on my mind. Jess's text lit up the screen like a neon sign announcing the end of my marriage. "Even if I don't come home tonight, I don't owe you an explanation." I stared at those words for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds to process 5 years of marriage dissolving into digital ink. 30 seconds to realize that my wife had just handed me the nuclear codes to her own destruction. I typed back, "Fine." Then I got to work. See, here's what Jessa never understood about me. She married an engineer who specialized in building management systems, a guy who understood that every structure has vulnerabilities, every system has override protocols, and every network can be reconfigured. She thought she was dealing with some pushover husband who'd sit around wringing his hands while she played house with her boss, Rory Veldon. She was wrong. By 11:45 p.m., I'd forwarded her number to my spare phone. The beauty of being the primary account holder is that you control the forwarding rules. Every call she'd make to our home number would ring straight to my backup device, which I could answer as anyone I pleased. 11:50 p.m. I accessed our building's resident portal. Harbor Towers used a sophisticated entry system that I'd helped design during the construction phase 3 years ago. Jessa Dornell was removed from the authorized resident list with 3 clicks. Her key fob access code was deactivated. Her name went straight onto the do not enter list that building security monitored around the clock. 11:55 p.m. I changed the electronic lock codes on our unit. The smart lock system sent a confirmation ping to my phone. New codes active, previous codes invalid. Midnight struck while I was updating the alarm system. Jessa's biometric data was purged from the security database. Her fingerprint would no longer disarm our home protection system. Her voice commands were deleted from the smart home network. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and started phase 2. Our joint accounts were about to become significantly less joint. I couldn't close them unilaterally, but I could transfer the funds into an escrow account that required both signatures for withdrawal. Since Jessa was presumably busy with her explanation-free evening, she wouldn't be signing anything soon. The shared app permissions took longer to revoke. Netflix, Spotify, Amazon Prime, grocery delivery services, parking apps, gym memberships, cloud storage, calendar sync, photo sharing, location tracking. Every digital thread that connected our lives got severed with methodical precision. I transferred ownership of our phone plan to my name only. Jessa's line would continue working, but she'd lost admin privileges. No more adding new devices, changing plans, or accessing account information. The car access tag for our building's parking garage was deactivated through the management portal. Jessa's BMW would no longer trigger the automatic gate system. By 2 a.m., I was packing her clothes into clearly labeled moving boxes. I wasn't cruel about it. Everything was folded neatly, sorted by type, with her jewelry and personal items wrapped carefully in tissue paper. I even included her collection of law journals and the pretentious coffee table books she'd insisted on buying. The locksmith invoice was scheduled to send to her email at 8 a.m. sharp. The timestamp would show exactly when the locks were changed, providing legal documentation that the security modifications occurred after her text message. Everything above board, everything defensible in court. I forwarded a copy of her no explanation text to my personal email, along with screenshots showing the timestamps of every action I'd taken. Documentation was going to be my best friend in the coming days. At 3:30 a.m., I finally went to bed. Alone in our king-sized bed for the first time in 5 years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, just the quiet calm that comes from taking decisive action after weeks of uncertainty. Because here's what Jessa didn't know. I'd been watching her for 2 months, The late nights at the office that stretched past midnight. The sudden interest in yoga classes that somehow required designer workout clothes. The way she'd started taking her phone into the bathroom during showers. The credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never seen. I'm not a detective, but I'm not stupid either. When your wife of 5 years suddenly develops a passion for working dinners with her boss 3 times a week, you start paying attention. When she begins scheduling weekend client meetings that require overnight trips to cities with no clients, you start taking notes. Rory Veldon, senior partner at Morrison, Kessler and Associates, where Jessa worked as a legal consultant. Divorced father of 2, drives a silver Porsche, lives in a Beacon Hill townhouse that cost more than most people's retirement funds. The kind of guy who wears $1,000 suits and thinks that money makes him untouchable. I'd done my homework on Mr. Veldon. Public records, social media profiles, professional networking sites, even his ex-wife's bitter divorce blog, where she detailed his cheating habits with remarkable specificity. Rory had a pattern. Target younger women at his firm, promise them career advancement, wine and dine them at expensive restaurants, then move on when the novelty wore off. Jessa was just his latest project. But she was about to discover that I wasn't the kind of husband who'd sit quietly while his marriage got dismantled. I was the kind of husband who'd dismantle everything else first. My alarm went off at 7 a.m. I showered, shaved, put on my best suit, and made breakfast for one. The morning news droned in the background while I ate scrambled eggs and reviewed my handiwork from the night before. Everything was still in place. All systems functioning as designed. At 8:10 a.m., my spare phone rang. The forwarded call from our home number showed Jessa's contact photo on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Dornell residence," I said in my best impression of Rory Veldon's pretentious accent. "This is Rory speaking." The silence on the other end stretched for 10 seconds. I could practically hear Jessa's brain trying to process what she was hearing. "What?" she finally whispered. "Kai, what's going on? Why does Rory's voice sound different? Why won't my key work?" "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number," I continued in Rory's voice. "This is the Dornell residence, but I'm not Kai. I'm just visiting." I hung up and immediately called my buddy Marv Ortiz, who ran a small private investigation business downtown. Marv and I went back to college, where he'd majored in criminal justice while I'd studied engineering. We'd stayed close over the years, bonding over Red Sox games and our shared appreciation for Boston's best dive bars. "Marv, it's Kai. I need a favor." "Jesus, it's 8 in the morning. What kind of favor requires a wake-up call?" "The kind that involves documenting adultery and making sure I have ironclad legal protection for what I'm about to do." Marv was quiet for a moment. "She finally did it, huh? The thing you've been suspecting?" "She did it and then texted me about it. I've got written confirmation that she chose not to come home last night, and I've got timestamps showing everything I did in response. What do you need from me?" "Legal consultation, evidence review, and maybe some help with surveillance. I want to make sure that when this goes public, I'm the victim and she's the cheater. No gray areas, no he said she said nonsense." "I'll be at your place in an hour. Don't do anything else until I get there." At 8:45 a.m., building security called. Jessa was in the lobby, demanding access to the 32nd floor. She was claiming that her key fob was malfunctioning and insisting that she lived in Unit 3247. "Sir, she's getting quite agitated," said Frank, the morning security guard. "She says she's your wife, but her name isn't on our current resident list." "That's correct, Frank. Jessa Dornell was removed from the authorized list last night. She no longer lives in this building. If she continues to cause a disturbance, please call the police." "Understood, sir. Should I allow her to collect personal belongings?" "Not without a court order. Everything she owns is properly packed and will be returned through appropriate legal channels." I watched from my living room window as Jessa emerged from the building's front entrance 30 minutes later. Even from 32 floors up, I could see her gesturing wildly at her phone, probably trying to call me again. The forwarded calls kept coming to my spare device, but I was done answering. Marv arrived at 9:30 with a briefcase full of legal documents and a laptop bag stuffed with surveillance equipment. He'd put on weight since college, but he still moved with the confident swagger of a guy who'd spent 20 years learning other people's secrets. "Show me everything," he said, settling into my kitchen chair and opening his laptop. I walked him through the timeline. Jessa's text, my response, the systematic removal of her access to our shared life. I showed him the screenshots, the email confirmations, the building security logs, the bank transfer records. Marv whistled low. "This is beautiful work, Kai. Absolutely beautiful. You've documented everything, maintained legal boundaries, and created a paper trail that shows clear cause and effect. She gave you written permission to treat her as a non-resident, and you followed through. What about the joint accounts? Can she claim I'm stealing from her? Escrow accounts are standard procedure in marital disputes. You didn't steal anything. You protected shared assets pending legal resolution. That's actually the responsible thing to do." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Jessa had apparently borrowed someone else's device. "Kai, this is insane. Let me into my home right now or I'm calling the police." I showed the message to Marv, who grinned. "Go ahead and call them," he said. "You've got everything documented. The police will take one look at her text from last night and your response timeline, and they'll tell her it's a civil matter." I texted back, "The police are welcome to review the documentation. Your belongings will be returned through proper legal channels." Marv spent the next hour reviewing every detail of my documentation. He helped me organize the evidence into a clear timeline, with supporting documents for each action I'd taken. By the time he finished, I had a legal brief that would make any divorce attorney weep with joy. "Now comes the fun part," Marv said, closing his laptop. "She's going to escalate. People like Jessa don't handle public embarrassment well, and you've just served her the most humiliating morning of her life. She'll strike back, probably through social media and mutual friends. Let her try. I've got truth on my side. Truth is good, but preparation is better. We need to get ahead of whatever story she's about to tell." As if summoned by his words, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Facebook messages, Instagram comments, text messages from friends and coworkers. Jessa had apparently decided to wage war on social media. The first message was from our mutual friend Lisa Chen. "Kai, what's going on? Jessa is posting some crazy stuff about you locking her out of her own home." I opened Facebook to find 3 posts from Jessa, each more dramatic than the last. She'd positioned herself as the victim of a controlling husband who'd suddenly snapped and locked her out without warning. She'd conveniently omitted any mention of her night away from home or her text message. The comments were already piling up. Jessa's friends expressing outrage and support, my friends asking for my side of the story, co-workers from both our offices weighing in with confusion and concern. "Time for phase 3, I told Marv. I crafted a single Facebook post with surgical precision. "I'm sorry that Jessa is going through a difficult time. For anyone concerned about the situation, I'm happy to share the complete timeline of events, including the text message she sent last night explaining that she wouldn't be coming home. All of my actions were taken in response to her written communication, and everything is fully documented with timestamps. I hope we can resolve this matter privately and with dignity." I attached a screenshot of Jessa's no explanation text, with the timestamp clearly visible. The response was immediate and devastating. The narrative flipped in real time as people realized they weren't seeing the whole story. Jessa's victim posts suddenly looked manipulative and dishonest. The sympathy comments dried up, replaced by questions and criticism. My phone rang. Jessa calling from yet another borrowed device. "You bastard," she hissed when I answered. "How dare you post our private messages online?" "I posted the message that you sent to me," explaining your decision not to come home. The same message that you somehow forgot to mention in your social media posts. That's not what that text meant, and you know it. Really? Because it seems pretty clear to me. You said you didn't owe me an explanation for not coming home. I said fine, then I acted accordingly. This is ridiculous, Kai. I'm your wife. I live in that apartment. You were my wife when you decided not to come home last night. You were my wife when you sent that text. You were my wife when you chose to prioritize whatever you were doing over our marriage. But you're not my wife when it's convenient for you and someone else's wife when it's not. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from anger to calculation. What do you want? Money? The apartment? What will it take to end this? I want you to stop lying to our friends about what happened. I want you to acknowledge that you made a choice last night, and choices have consequences. And I want you to think very carefully about your next move, because I've got a lot more documentation than just one text message. I hung up and turned to Marv. Think she'll back down? Not a chance. She's going to escalate, probably involve Rory directly. You've humiliated her in front of everyone she knows. She'll want revenge. He was right, of course. Within an hour, I had a voicemail from Rory Velden himself. His voice was smooth and confident, the tone of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. Kai, this is Rory Velden from Morrison, Kessler and Associates. I think there's been a misunderstanding regarding Jessa's living situation. I'd like to discuss this matter with you directly, attorney to engineer. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Marv. Looks like Loverboy wants to negotiate. Perfect. Let him dig his own grave. The more involved he gets, the more evidence we have of their relationship. I didn't call Rory back. Instead, I spent the afternoon researching Massachusetts tenant law, divorce procedures, and restraining order requirements. If Jessa wanted to escalate, I'd be ready for anything she could throw at me. By evening, the social media war had shifted decisively in my favor. Jessa's posts had been overwhelmed by comments questioning her version of events. Several mutual friends had reached out privately to express support for my position. The narrative was set. Cheating wife gets locked out after telling husband she won't be coming home. I ordered Chinese takeout and settled in to watch the Red Sox game. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Jessa had made her choice, and now she was living with the consequences. The game was in the 7th inning when my building's front desk called. Mr. Dornell, there's a police officer here who'd like to speak with you about a domestic dispute report. Send him up. Officer Martinez was a tired-looking guy in his 40s who'd clearly handled his share of marital disputes. He listened patiently while I walked him through the timeline, showed him the documentation, and explained the legal steps I'd taken. So your wife sent you a text saying she wouldn't be coming home, you changed the locks, and now she's claiming you locked her out without cause? That's correct. Everything I did was in response to her written communication. I have timestamps for every action. Officer Martinez reviewed the screenshots on my phone, then shook his head. Sir, this is clearly a civil matter. Your wife gave you written notice that she wouldn't be coming home. You responded by securing your residence, and you've offered to return her belongings through legal channels. There's no crime here. What should I do if she continues to demand access to the building? If she continues to trespass after being told she's not authorized, that becomes a criminal matter. But based on what I'm seeing here, you're well within your rights to deny her access. After Officer Martinez left, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my living room window, looking out over Boston's glittering skyline. Somewhere out there, Jessa was probably plotting her next move. Maybe she was with Rory, strategizing about how to regain control of the situation. Maybe she was calling lawyers, looking for some legal angle to force her way back into the apartment. It didn't matter. I'd built my defense carefully, and every attack she launched would only strengthen my position. She'd chosen to play games with our marriage, and now she was discovering that I was better at games than she'd ever imagined. The war was just beginning, but I'd already won the first battle, and in a war of attrition, the side with better documentation usually wins. Tuesday morning arrived with the subtlety of a fire alarm. I woke up to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and a voicemail from someone claiming to be Jessa's attorney. The digital assault had begun in earnest while I'd been sleeping peacefully in my reclaimed bedroom. The attorney's message was pure legal theater. Mr. Dornell, this is Patricia Hoffman from Hoffman & Associates, representing Jessa Dornell in this matter. Your actions constitute illegal lockout and potential domestic abuse. We demand immediate restoration of Mrs. Dornell's access to the marital residence, or we will be forced to seek emergency court intervention. I forwarded the message to Marv along with a text. Game time. The text messages were a fascinating study in manipulation tactics. Jessa had clearly spent the night crafting her counterattack, reaching out to every mutual friend, co-worker, and family member she could think of. The messages ranged from concerned, "Kai, is everything okay? Jessa says you've lost it," to accusatory, "How could you do this to her? She's scared and has nowhere to go," to threatening, "You better fix this before it gets ugly." But the real masterpiece was her Facebook post from 3 a.m. Sometimes the person you trust most becomes the person who hurts you worst. I never imagined that asking for space in my marriage would result in being locked out of my own home with nothing but the clothes on my back. Thank you to everyone offering support during this difficult time. I'm staying strong and trusting that truth will prevail. Asking for space. That was rich. Apparently, spending the night with her boss had been rebranded as a request for marital breathing room. I screenshotted everything before responding. Documentation first, reaction second. My phone rang as I was reviewing the evidence. Marv, calling from his car. "I'm 5 minutes away. Don't respond to anything until I get there. The attorney threat is probably a bluff, but we need to be careful about how we handle this." What kind of bluff? Emergency court intervention for a lockout requires showing immediate harm and illegal action. You've got written consent from Jessa to treat her as a non-resident, and you've offered to return her belongings through proper channels. No judge is going to issue an emergency order based on those facts. Marv arrived with coffee and bagels, settling into my kitchen like a general preparing for battle. He'd brought his laptop and a legal pad covered with notes from his research the night before. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, opening his laptop. "They're going to try 3 approaches: legal intimidation, social pressure, and direct confrontation. We need to be ready for all of them." "What's our strategy?" "Simple. We stick to facts, maintain documentation, and let them destroy their own credibility. Every lie they tell makes our case stronger." As if on cue, my building's front desk called. "Mr. Dornell, there's a woman here claiming to be your wife, along with a man in a suit who says he's an attorney. They're demanding access to your floor." "What's the woman's name?" "She says Jessa Dornell, but she's not on our resident list." "That's correct. She was removed from the authorized list on Monday night. The man with her is not an attorney representing me, so he has no legal right to access this building. If they continue to cause a disturbance, please call the police." I hung up and turned to Marv. "They're trying the legal intimidation approach first." "Perfect. Let them create a scene in the lobby. Building security cameras will document everything." My phone immediately rang. Unknown number, probably Jessa calling from the lobby. "Kai, this is ridiculous," she said without preamble. "I have an attorney here who's explaining that what you're doing is illegal. Just let us up so we can discuss this like adults." "I'm happy to discuss this through proper legal channels. Have your attorney contact my attorney to schedule a meeting." "Who's your attorney?" "You'll find out when your attorney contacts him. In the meantime, you're trespassing in a building where you're no longer authorized to be present." "This is my home, Kai. I've lived here for 3 years." "You lived here until you sent me a text explaining that you wouldn't be coming home. That was your choice, communicated in writing. I simply responded accordingly." The line went quiet for a moment. Then a different voice came on, male and officious. Mr. Dornell, this is Attorney James Morrison. Your actions constitute illegal self-help eviction, and we're prepared to seek emergency court intervention if you don't restore Mrs. Dornell's access immediately. I put the phone on speaker so Marv could hear. Mr. Morrison, I'm not familiar with that legal theory. Could you explain how responding to my wife's written notice that she won't be coming home constitutes eviction? Mrs. Dornell's text message was taken out of context. She was simply informing you that she would be working late and might not return until morning. Really? Because the message I received said, and I quote, "Even if I don't come home tonight, I don't owe you an explanation." That doesn't sound like a work schedule update to me. Marv was grinning and taking notes. He scribbled something on his legal pad and showed it to me. Keep him talking. He's digging his own grave. Mr. Dornell, we're prepared to file for emergency relief this morning if necessary. You're certainly welcome to do that. I'm sure the judge will be very interested in reviewing the complete text message exchange, along with the timestamps showing when I took action in response to Mrs. Dornell's communication. I assume you've seen the full documentation? Another pause, longer this time. We'll be in touch through proper channels. Marv was laughing. He hasn't seen the text message. Jessa told him some story about working late and he just realized she's been lying to him. Think they'll actually file for emergency relief? Not a chance. No attorney wants to walk into court with a case that's going to blow up in his face. He'll do some research, realize that Jessa's story doesn't hold water, and probably drop her as a client. Building security called back 20 minutes later. Mr. Dornell, the woman and the man in the suit have left the building. The woman was quite upset, and there was some kind of argument between her and the man before they left separately. Thank you, Frank. I appreciate you handling that professionally. I spent the rest of the morning crafting my response to the social media campaign. Instead of getting defensive, I decided to go on offense with a detailed timeline post. Since there seems to be some confusion about recent events, I'd like to provide a clear timeline for anyone who's concerned. Monday, 11:42 p.m. I received a text message stating, "Even if I don't come home tonight, I don't owe you an explanation." Monday, 11:43 p.m. I replied, "Fine." Monday, 11:45 p.m., 12:30 a.m. I took appropriate steps to secure our residence and protect shared assets, as is my legal right when my spouse chooses not to return home. Tuesday, 8:10 a.m. Access was requested to a residence where the requesting party no longer maintains authorization. Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. An individual claiming to be an attorney demanded access to private property without proper legal authority. All actions were taken in response to clear written communication, with full documentation and timestamps. I remain committed to resolving this matter through appropriate legal channels with dignity and respect for everyone involved. The response was swift and decisive. The comments section filled with people praising my restraint and questioning Jessa's version of events. Several friends posted supportive messages, and even some of Jessa's allies began hedging their bets with more neutral language. But the real victory came an hour later, when Jessa posted her response. I can't believe Kai is trying to make this about one text message taken out of context. Anyone who knows me knows I would never abandon my marriage. I was working late on an important case, and simply letting him know I might not make it home before he went to bed. His reaction was completely disproportionate and cruel. The problem with lies is that they require consistency, and Jessa had just contradicted her attorney's story from the morning phone call. Marv pointed out the discrepancy immediately. Her attorney said she was working late and might not return until morning. Now she's saying she might not make it home before you went to bed. Which is it? More importantly, her explanation didn't match the actual language of her text message. Even if I don't come home tonight, I don't owe you an explanation. Wasn't about working late. It was about not coming home at all, and specifically about not owing any explanation for that choice. The comments on her post reflected the growing skepticism. People were asking pointed questions about the discrepancy between her story and the actual text message. Some were suggesting that there might be more to the situation than she was sharing. By afternoon, the social media tide had turned completely. Jessa's credibility was shot. Her attorney had probably fired her, and public opinion was solidly on my side. But I knew this was just the beginning. Desperate people make desperate moves, and Jessa was about to get very desperate indeed. The next escalation came at 4 p.m. in the form of a conference call from Jessa's parents. Harold and Margaret Whitmore had never liked me, viewing me as an unsuitable match for their precious daughter. Harold was old Boston money, a retired investment banker who'd spent 40 years looking down his nose at people like me. Margaret was a professional socialite who measured worth by zip codes and country club memberships. Kai, Harold's voice dripped with condescension, we need to discuss this situation with Jessa immediately. I'm happy to discuss it. What would you like to know? We want to know why you've suddenly decided to destroy our daughter's life over some trivial marital spat. I haven't destroyed anything, Harold. I responded to Jessa's written communication that she wouldn't be coming home and didn't owe me an explanation. Everything I did was in direct response to her choices. Margaret's voice was shrill with indignation. That's not what she told us. She said you locked her out without warning because you were jealous of her success at work. Did she show you the text message she sent me? Silence. Then Harold. What text message? I read them the exact message, word for word. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice much quieter. That doesn't sound like something Jessa would say. I have screenshots with timestamps if you'd like to see them. I also have documentation of every action I took in response, including the exact times when building access was modified. Harold cleared his throat. Perhaps we should speak with Jessa again before continuing this conversation. That's probably a good idea. I think you'll find that there's quite a bit she hasn't told you about her recent activities. After they hung up, I felt a grim satisfaction. Jessa's support network was crumbling as people realized she'd been lying to them. Her parents, her friends, even her attorney were starting to question her version of events. But the real test was still to come. Rory Veldon hadn't made another move since his voicemail yesterday, but I knew he was planning something. Men like Rory don't like being exposed, and they certainly don't like being connected to messy domestic situations that could damage their professional reputations. I didn't have to wait long. At 6 p.m., my building's front desk called again. Mr. Dornell, there's a man here asking to speak with you. Says his name is Rory Veldon, and that it's about a business matter. Tell Mr. Veldon that I don't conduct business meetings in my residence. If he has a professional matter to discuss, he can contact me through appropriate channels during business hours. He says it's urgent and relates to a mutual acquaintance. I almost laughed. Rory was trying to get upstairs without admitting why he was really there. Please inform Mr. Veldon that I don't discuss mutual acquaintances with strangers. If he has legitimate business to conduct, he can schedule an appointment through proper channels. Marv was still at my kitchen table, monitoring social media responses and organizing documentation. He looked up when I hung up the phone. Lover boy making house calls? Apparently, probably trying to negotiate some kind of deal to keep his name out of this. What are you thinking for next moves? I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense. Jessa and Rory have been controlling the narrative by forcing me to respond to their moves. Time to make some moves of my own. I opened my laptop and began researching Rory Veldon's professional background. Morrison, Kessler and Associates was a prestigious firm with a reputation for handling high-profile corporate law. They represented several major Boston companies, including some with strict moral clauses in their partnership agreements. More importantly, Rory was married. His wife, Catherine Veldon, was a prominent figure in Boston's charity circuit. She served on the boards of several major nonprofits and was frequently featured in society pages. Their divorce 3 years ago had been bitter and public, with Catherine accusing Rory of serial infidelity. But here's the interesting part. They'd remarried last year. A big society wedding, covered in all the local magazines. Catherine had apparently forgiven Rory's past indiscretions in exchange for his promise to change his ways. I wondered how Catherine would feel about her husband's current extracurricular activities. "Marv," I said, closing the laptop, "how would you feel about doing some surveillance work?" "On Rory?" "On Rory and Jessa. I want to document their relationship with the same precision I've documented everything else. Photos, locations, timestamps, the works." "That could get expensive." "I've got money. What I don't have is a cheating wife who's stupid enough to put her affair in writing. But if I can document their relationship thoroughly enough, I won't need her confession." Marv grinned. "Now you're thinking like a PI. When do we start?" "Tonight. Jess is going to need somewhere to stay, and I doubt she's sleeping in her car. My guess is she's been staying with Rory, which means we can probably catch them together." We spent the next hour planning surveillance routes and identifying key locations: Rory's Beacon Hill townhouse, his office building, the restaurants where they'd been meeting, the hotel where Jessa's credit card had been charged last weekend. By 8 p.m., we were parked across the street from Morrison, Kessler & Associates, watching the office building's parking garage. Rory's silver Porsche was still in his reserved spot, which meant he was probably working late, or pretending to work late while actually dealing with the crisis I'd created. At 8:30, Jessa's BMW pulled into the visitor parking area. She sat in her car for several minutes, probably psyching herself up for whatever conversation was about to happen. When she finally got out, she looked exhausted and defeated. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled from wearing them for 2 days straight. "There's our confirmation," Marv said, snapping photos with a telephoto lens. "She's definitely staying with him." We followed them when they left the office building an hour later, driving separately but clearly coordinating their route. They met at a restaurant in the North End, one of those intimate Italian places where cheating spouses go to plan their next moves. Marv got photos of them entering together, sitting at a corner table, leaning close in conversation that looked anything but professional. When they left the restaurant, they drove to Rory's townhouse, where Jessa's car stayed parked overnight. "That's enough for tonight," I said as we drove back to Harbor Towers. "We've got documentation of them meeting privately, dining together, and spending the night at his residence. Combined with everything else, that's a pretty compelling case for adultery. What's the next move?" "Tomorrow we go public. I'm done playing defense." Wednesday morning, I woke up with the clarity that comes from having a concrete plan. Jessa had spent 2 days trying to control the narrative through lies and manipulation. Now it was time for some truth. I crafted my social media post carefully, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Update on recent events. I've been asked by several people whether there's more to this situation than a single text message. The answer is yes. For the past 2 months, I've been aware of concerning changes in my wife's behavior and schedule. Monday night's text message was simply the final confirmation of what I already suspected. I have documentation of the complete timeline, including evidence of activities that preceded Monday's events. I've chosen not to share these details publicly out of respect for everyone involved, but they're available for review by anyone with legitimate concerns. I remain committed to handling this matter with dignity while protecting my own interests. The post was deliberately vague, but clearly implied that I had evidence of infidelity. The response was immediate and intense. People were asking direct questions about whether Jessa was cheating, and several friends were privately messaging me asking for more details. Jessa's response came within an hour. "I'm disgusted by Kai's continued attempts to destroy my reputation with vague accusations and implied threats. I have done nothing wrong, and I won't be intimidated by his bullying tactics. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm committed to my marriage and would never betray my husband's trust." The problem with categorical denials is that they're easy to disprove. By claiming she'd done nothing wrong and would never betray my trust, Jessa had set herself up for devastating exposure when I released the evidence. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. First, I wanted to see how far she'd go with her lies. The answer came that afternoon, in the form of a new Facebook post that took my breath away with its audacity. I've been hesitant to share this, but Kai's continued harassment is forcing me to speak out about the real reason for our marital problems. For months, he's been increasingly controlling and paranoid, accusing me of infidelity without any basis and demanding to monitor my every move. Monday night, I told him I needed space to think about our relationship, and his response was to lock me out of my own home and launch a social media campaign to destroy my reputation. I'm sharing this because other women need to know the warning signs of emotional abuse. No one should have to live in fear of their spouse's reaction to normal independence. Emotional abuse. She was actually claiming that I was abusive for responding to her affair with logical consequences. The comments section exploded. Jessa's friends rallied around her with expressions of support and outrage. Several people shared their own stories of controlling relationships. The narrative was shifting back in her favor as people responded to the abuse allegations. But Jessa had just made a critical error. By claiming that Monday night was about needing space to think about our relationship, she'd contradicted her previous story about working late. More importantly, by denying any infidelity and positioning herself as a victim of paranoid accusations, she'd given me permission to release evidence that would destroy her credibility completely. I called Marv. It's time. She just claimed I'm abusive and paranoid for suspecting infidelity. She's opened the door for us to prove that my suspicions were justified. You sure you want to go nuclear? Once you release surveillance photos, there's no going back. She called me an abuser, Marv. She's trying to destroy my reputation by claiming I'm paranoid and controlling. I'm not going to let that stand. All right, let's burn it down. I spent 2 hours organizing the evidence into a comprehensive timeline. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants and hotels I'd never been to. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between Jessa and Rory outside business hours. Surveillance photos from the previous night showing them together at dinner and at his townhouse. But the centerpiece was a series of photos Marv had taken that morning. Jessa leaving Rory's townhouse at 7 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes. Rory kissing her goodbye at his front door. The two of them embracing in a way that was anything but professional. I uploaded everything to a private photo album and crafted my final post. I've tried to handle this situation with dignity and privacy, but I can't allow false accusations of abuse to stand unchallenged. Below is documented evidence that my concerns about my wife's behavior were not only justified, but understated. This evidence spans 2 months and includes financial records, communication logs, and photographic documentation. I'm sharing this not to hurt anyone, but to defend myself against false accusations and to ensure that the truth is available for anyone who needs to see it. I take no pleasure in this disclosure, but I won't be called an abuser for responding appropriately to documented infidelity. I tagged the photo album and hit post. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Within minutes, the post had dozens of comments and shares. People were viewing the evidence, connecting the dots, and realizing that Jessa had been lying about everything. The photos were devastating. There was no way to explain away images of her leaving Rory's house in yesterday's clothes, or the intimate embrace at his front door. The financial records showed a clear pattern of deception, with charges for romantic dinners and hotel rooms that coincided with her claimed work meetings. Jessa's support network collapsed in real time. Friends who had been defending her just hours earlier were now posting shocked reactions and apologies. Her abuse allegations looked ridiculous in light of evidence showing that she'd been conducting a months-long affair while lying to everyone about it. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. Catherine Veldon, Rory's wife. "Thank you for sharing this evidence," she commented on my post. "I had no idea that my husband had resumed his old patterns of behavior. This information will be very helpful in my upcoming legal proceedings. Game over. Jessa's affair was exposed, her credibility was destroyed, and now Rory was facing his own domestic crisis. The woman who'd accused me of paranoid jealousy had been caught red-handed, and the man who'd thought he was untouchable was about to discover that actions have consequences. My phone was buzzing with calls and messages, but I ignored them all. I'd said everything that needed to be said. The evidence spoke for itself, and the truth was finally public. Jessa's final Facebook post came at midnight. Account deleted. She'd run out of lies, run out of allies, and run out of options. The woman who'd told me she didn't owe me an explanation was about to discover that the world disagreed. Thursday morning brought a silence that felt like the calm before a hurricane. My phone had stopped buzzing with notifications overnight, not because people had lost interest, but because there was nothing left to debate. The evidence I'd released had been so comprehensive and damning that even Jessa's most loyal supporters had abandoned ship. I made coffee and reviewed the aftermath from my kitchen table. Jessa's Facebook account was indeed deleted, but the screenshots of her posts were still circulating as people shared them with commentary about manipulation and false accusations. Rory's professional LinkedIn profile had been flooded with comments and connection requests from people who'd seen the evidence. Catherine Veldon had posted a statement on her own social media announcing that she was filing for divorce and thanking me for providing crucial documentation of my husband's continued infidelity. But the most interesting development was a voice message from Harold Whitmore, Jessa's father, left at 2:47 a.m. "Kai, this is Harold. I owe you an apology. We had no idea about Jessa's activities. Margaret and I are horrified by what we've learned. Please call me when you get this message. We need to discuss how to handle this situation moving forward." I didn't call him back immediately. Let him stew for a while. Let him fully absorb the reality that his perfect daughter had been lying to everyone for months. Instead, I called Marv. "Status report. Complete victory," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Jessa's story has collapsed. Rory's marriage is over, and you've got enough evidence to win any divorce proceeding hands down. What's your next move?" "I want to make sure this stays won. Desperate people do desperate things, and I don't want Jessa or Rory trying to stage some kind of comeback." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to have some face-to-face conversations, starting with Rory." Rory Veldon's office was in a gleaming downtown tower that screamed expensive legal services. Morrison, Kessler & Associates occupied 3 floors of prime real estate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. I'd never been there before, but I'd done my research on the building's layout and security procedures. I arrived at 10 a.m. wearing my best suit and carrying a leather briefcase that contained nothing but blank legal pads and a digital recorder. The receptionist was a young woman who probably made more money than most engineers, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than my monthly car payment. "I'd like to see Rory Veldon," I said, handing her a business card that identified me as a building systems consultant. "I have some information about a project he's been working on." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I think he'll want to see me immediately. Please tell him that Kai Dornell is here regarding the Jessa project." She made the call, and I watched her expression change as she listened to whatever Rory was saying on the other end. When she hung up, she looked confused and slightly nervous. "Mr. Veldon says he's not available and suggests you contact his office to schedule an appointment through proper channels. Please call him back and tell him that if he doesn't see me now, my next conversation will be with the managing partners of this firm. I have documentation that they'll find very interesting regarding his recent professional activities." Another call. This time, her expression shifted to alarm. "Mr. Veldon will see you now. 32nd floor, corner office." The elevator ride gave me time to prepare my approach. I wasn't here to threaten or intimidate. I was here to establish boundaries and make sure Rory understood the consequences of any future interference in my life. Rory's office was exactly what I'd expected. Massive mahogany desk, expensive artwork, floor-to-ceiling law books, and a view of Boston Harbor that probably added $50,000 to his annual rent. The man himself looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. "What do you want?" he said without preamble. "I want to make sure we understand each other," I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk without being invited. "You've been having an affair with my wife for 2 months. That affair has now been exposed publicly, ending your marriage and destroying Jessa's credibility. I want to ensure that neither of you attempts to retaliate against me for documenting and exposing your behavior. I don't know what you think you're going to accomplish here. I'm going to accomplish clarity. See, Rory, you made a mistake when you got involved with Jessa. You thought you were dealing with some pushover husband who'd quietly accept being cheated on. But I'm not that guy. I'm the guy who documents everything, plans ahead, and follows through on consequences." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. This contains additional evidence that I haven't released yet. Photos of you and Jessa at hotels, restaurants, and your townhouse going back 6 weeks. Financial records showing that you've been paying for dinners, gifts, and accommodations for my wife. Communication records showing hundreds of personal calls and messages between you two during business hours. Rory's face had gone pale. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that if either you or Jessa attempts to retaliate against me in any way, if you try to salvage your reputations by attacking mine, if you contact my employer or attempt to interfere with my life in any capacity, I will release everything. And I mean everything. Photos that would make your divorce proceedings very expensive. Evidence that would raise questions about your professional conduct. Documentation that would interest the Massachusetts Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining consequences. You chose to have an affair with my wife. I chose to document and expose that affair. Those were both choices, and choices have results. The result for you is that your behavior is now thoroughly documented, and any future bad behavior will have immediate and devastating consequences. I stood up and closed the briefcase. I'm not your enemy, Rory. I'm just the guy who refuses to be your victim. Stay out of my life, encourage Jessa to do the same, and we'll never have to see each other again. But if you try to cause problems for me, you'll discover that I'm much better at causing problems than you are." I left him sitting at his desk, staring out at the harbor and probably contemplating the wreckage of his life. The conversation had gone exactly as I'd planned. No threats, no violence, just a clear explanation of the situation and the consequences of future bad behavior. My next stop was a coffee shop in Beacon Hill, 2 blocks from Rory's townhouse. I'd sent Jessa a text from an anonymous number asking her to meet me there at 2 p.m. The message was simple. "We need to talk. Come alone." She arrived 15 minutes late, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her designer clothes were wrinkled and mismatched, her usually perfect hair was unkempt, and her face showed the strain of 3 days of public humiliation. She spotted me immediately and walked over with the cautious gait of someone approaching a dangerous animal. "What do you want, Kai?" "I want to make sure you understand the new rules," I said, gesturing for her to sit across from me. "Your old life is over. Your affair is public knowledge. Your credibility is destroyed, and your support network has collapsed. What happens next depends on how intelligently you handle the situation. I'm not going to be intimidated by you." "I'm not trying to intimidate you, Jessa. I'm trying to educate you. You made choices that had consequences. I documented those consequences and shared them when you tried to destroy my reputation with false abuse allegations. Now we're all living with the results." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. "I have 17 interview requests from local media outlets who want to do stories about social media infidelity and false abuse allegations. I have 3 requests from legal blogs who want to write about documentation and evidence in divorce proceedings. I have 2 requests from domestic abuse organizations who want to discuss the damage that false accusations do to real victims. Her face went white. You wouldn't. I haven't decided yet. It depends on how you handle yourself moving forward. If you disappear quietly, accept responsibility for your choices, and don't attempt to retaliate against me in any way, then this story ends here. But if you try to stage some kind of comeback, if you attempt to rehabilitate your reputation by attacking mine, if you contact my employer or try to interfere with my life, then I'll accept every interview request and turn this into a national conversation about adultery and false accusations. This is blackmail. No, this is consequences. Blackmail would be if I demanded money or favors in exchange for keeping quiet. I'm not asking you for anything except to leave me alone and accept responsibility for your own behavior. I leaned forward slightly. Here's what's going to happen, Jessa. You're going to move out of Boston. You're going to find a new job in a new city where people don't know about your recent activities. You're going to rebuild your life somewhere else, and you're going to do it without trying to drag me down with you. I can't just leave. I have a career here, friends, a life. You had a career here. You had friends here. You had a life here. Past tense, you destroyed all of that when you chose to have an affair and then lie about it publicly. What you have now is an opportunity to start over somewhere else, assuming you're smart enough to take it. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. I never meant for it to go this far. I know. You meant to have your affair quietly, divorce me on your terms, and walk away with half of everything while maintaining your reputation as the victim of a failed marriage. But that's not how it worked out. What about our divorce? What about the apartment, the assets, everything we built together? The divorce will be simple. You'll get whatever Massachusetts law requires me to give you, nothing more. The apartment stays with me, since you're the one who chose to leave. The shared assets will be divided according to legal requirements, with appropriate adjustments for any money you spent on your affair. I stood up and put my phone away. You have 1 week to decide whether you're going to handle this intelligently or whether you want to make it worse for yourself. If I don't hear from you by next Thursday, I'll assume you've chosen the intelligent path. If you try to cause problems for me, you'll discover that public humiliation was just the opening act. I left her sitting in the coffee shop, probably contemplating the wreckage of her life and trying to figure out how she'd lost control of the situation so completely. The final conversation was with Harold and Margaret Whitmore, Jessa's parents. They'd requested a meeting at their Beacon Hill mansion, probably hoping that familiar territory would give them some psychological advantage. I agreed to meet them that evening, curious to see how they'd handle the revelation that their perfect daughter was a cheating liar. The Whitmore house was exactly what I'd expected. Old money elegance, expensive furniture, and the kind of understated luxury that screams generational wealth. Harold answered the door himself, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. Margaret was waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of an antique sofa like she was afraid to fully commit to sitting down. "Thank you for coming," Harold said, gesturing for me to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. "We owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Harold. You believed your daughter's version of events. That's what parents do." "We should have known better," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. The signs were there. The changes in her behavior, the secrecy, the defensiveness when we asked about her marriage. We chose to believe her explanations because we wanted to believe them. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Harold cleared his throat. "We want to know what we can do to minimize the damage to our family's reputation. This situation has already become public knowledge in our social circles, and we're concerned about the long-term implications." I almost laughed. Even in the face of their daughter's complete moral collapse, they were worried about their social standing. "The damage is already done, Harold. Jessa's choices have consequences that extend beyond just her own life. Your family's reputation is going to suffer because your daughter conducted a public affair and then tried to cover it with false abuse allegations. Is there anything we can do to mitigate the situation? You can encourage Jessa to handle this intelligently. She's talking about trying to rebuild her reputation here in Boston, which would require continuing to attack my credibility. If she does that, this story is going to get much bigger and much worse for everyone involved. Margaret leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean that if Jessa tries to stage a comeback, I'll make this a national story about infidelity, false accusations, and social media manipulation. Your daughter will become a cautionary tale, and your family name will be associated with that story forever. The room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Harold spoke. What would you consider an acceptable resolution? Jessa leaves Boston. She finds a new job in a new city, rebuilds her life somewhere else, and never attempts to contact me again. The divorce proceeds quietly through legal channels with minimal public attention. Everyone moves on with their lives. And if she agrees to this, then this story ends here. I don't give any interviews, I don't write any articles, and I don't turn your daughter into a public example of what not to do in a marriage. Harold and Margaret exchanged glances. We'll speak with Jessa, Harold said finally. We'll encourage her to consider your suggestion. It's not a suggestion, Harold. It's the only intelligent path forward. Everything else leads to more public humiliation and more damage to everyone involved. I stood up to leave. You raised a daughter who thought she could lie and manipulate her way through life without consequences. She's discovering that the world doesn't work that way. The question now is whether she's smart enough to learn from this experience or whether she's going to keep making the same mistakes until there's nothing left to salvage. The drive back to Harbor Towers gave me time to reflect on the day's conversations. I delivered the same message to everyone involved. The old situation was over. The new reality had specific rules, and violating those rules would have immediate and devastating consequences. Rory understood that any attempt to retaliate would result in the release of additional evidence that would destroy what remained of his professional reputation. Jessa understood that trying to rebuild her life in Boston would result in national media attention that would make her current humiliation look mild by comparison. Her parents understood that their family's social standing depended on their daughter's willingness to disappear quietly. The chess pieces were all in position. Now I just had to wait and see whether everyone would play their parts intelligently. Friday brought the first test of the new order. I woke up to find a voice message from Jessa, left at 3 a.m. Kai, I've been thinking about what you said. I want to discuss terms for moving forward. Can we meet somewhere private to talk about details? I didn't call her back immediately. Instead, I forwarded the message to Marv and asked for his opinion. His response was immediate. Sounds like she's ready to negotiate. But be careful. Desperate people sometimes try desperate moves. I agreed to meet Jessa that afternoon at a neutral location. A busy restaurant in Cambridge where we'd be surrounded by witnesses but could still have a private conversation. I arrived early and chose a table with clear sight lines to all exits, just in case she'd decided to try something stupid. She arrived on time, looking more composed than she had the day before. She'd managed to put together a professional outfit and had done something with her hair that made her look almost like her old self. But there was something different in her eyes, a defeated quality that hadn't been there before. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sitting across from me with the careful movements of someone who knows they're in a precarious position. What do you want to discuss? Terms. You said that if I handle this intelligently, you won't make it worse for me. I want to know exactly what that means. I pulled out a legal pad and pen. It means you leave Boston within 30 days. You find employment in a different city, preferably one where our social and professional circles don't overlap. You don't attempt to contact me, my friends, my family, or my employer. You don't give interviews or write articles about our marriage or divorce. You don't attempt to rehabilitate your reputation by attacking mine. What about the divorce proceedings? We use mediation instead of litigation. We divide assets according to Massachusetts law with appropriate adjustments for marital misconduct. The process stays private and gets resolved quickly. What about my professional references? I can't get a new job without references from my current employer. That's between you and Morrison, Kessler and Associates. I assume they're not thrilled about having their senior partner's affair become public knowledge, so they'll probably be motivated to help you find employment elsewhere. She was quiet for a moment, processing the terms. And if I agree to all of this, you won't give any interviews or make this into a bigger story? That's correct. This story ends with your departure from Boston. No interviews, no articles, no social media posts, no public discussion of any kind. What about Rory? What happens to him? That's not my concern. Rory's problems are between him and his wife, his employer, and his professional licensing board. I'm not targeting him specifically, but I'm also not protecting him from the natural consequences of his choices. Jessa nodded slowly. I need some time to think about this. You have until next Thursday. If you haven't agreed to these terms by then, I'll assume you've chosen a different path, and I'll respond accordingly. What does that mean? It means I'll accept the interview requests I've been declining. It means I'll write articles about documentation and evidence in divorce proceedings. It means I'll turn this into a case study about infidelity, false accusations, and social media manipulation. Your name and story will become permanently associated with those topics. She flinched. That's not fair. Fair? I leaned back in my chair. You had an affair for 2 months, lied to everyone about it, tried to make me look like an abusive husband when I exposed your behavior, and now you're worried about fairness? I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to have my entire life destroyed. Your life isn't being destroyed, Jessa. It's being relocated. You can rebuild anywhere you want, as long as it's not here. You can have a successful career, meaningful relationships, and a happy life. You just can't have those things in Boston while continuing to lie about what happened between us. I stood up and put the legal pad away. You have 6 days to decide. Choose wisely. The weekend passed quietly. No calls, no messages, no attempts at contact from anyone involved in the situation. I spent Saturday cleaning out closets and donating clothes that Jessa had left behind, erasing the last physical traces of her presence in the apartment. Sunday, I met Marv for Red Sox tickets and beer, enjoying the first normal social interaction I'd had in weeks. Think she'll take the deal? Marv asked during the 7th inning stretch. She'd be crazy not to. It's the best offer she's going to get. What if she tries to call your bluff? What if she thinks you won't actually follow through on the media threats? Then she'll discover that I don't bluff. Monday brought an unexpected development. Harold Whitmore called and asked if he could stop by my office to discuss family matters. I agreed to meet him at 3 p.m., curious about what Jessa's father might want to discuss privately. Harold arrived, looking like he'd aged another 5 years since our last conversation. He was carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of a man who'd been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about his family. Thank you for seeing me, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I wanted to discuss Jessa's situation privately. What about it? Margaret and I have been talking, and we think your terms are reasonable. We're prepared to help facilitate Jessa's transition to a new city. What kind of help? Financial assistance for relocation, professional networking to help her find employment, whatever support she needs to start over successfully. I was surprised. Why would you do that? Harold was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. Because we failed her, Kai. We raised her to believe that she could manipulate her way out of any situation, that her beauty and charm would always protect her from consequences. We taught her that appearance was more important than character, that reputation mattered more than integrity. That's quite an admission. It's the truth. And now she's paying the price for our failures as parents. The least we can do is help her learn from this experience and build a better life somewhere else. He opened his portfolio and pulled out a sheet of paper. We've identified several cities where she could start fresh. We have professional contacts in each location who might be willing to help her find employment. We're prepared to cover all relocation expenses and provide financial support until she's established. I reviewed the list. Seattle, Denver, Atlanta, Austin. All major cities with strong legal markets, all far enough from Boston to ensure that our paths wouldn't cross accidentally. This is generous, I said. What do you want from me in return? Just your agreement to the terms you've already outlined. No interviews, no articles, no public discussion of the situation. Let this story end with her departure. And Jessa has agreed to this plan? She will. She's scared, Kai. She's finally realized that her old tactics aren't going to work anymore. She needs guidance and support to make better choices, and Margaret and I are committed to providing that. I handed the paper back to him. If Jessa agrees to the relocation plan and sticks to the terms we discussed, then yes, this story ends with her departure. But if she tries to cause problems from her new location, if she gives interviews or writes articles or attempts to retaliate in any way, then all bets are off. Understood. We'll make sure she understands the consequences of any future bad behavior. Harold stood up and extended his hand. Thank you for handling this with more grace than we probably deserved. I shook his hand. I never wanted to destroy anyone's life, Harold. I just wanted to protect my own. Tuesday brought the confirmation I'd been expecting. Jessa called and asked to meet one final time to formalize our agreement. We met at the same Cambridge restaurant, and she brought a written statement accepting all the terms we'd discussed. I'll be moving to Denver, she said, sliding the signed document across the table. My parents have contacts there who can help me find employment. I'll be gone by the end of the month. Good choice. Denver's a nice city with plenty of opportunities. I want you to know that I'm sorry, not just about getting caught, but about everything. You didn't deserve what I put you through. No, I didn't. But apologies don't undo actions, Jessa. They just acknowledge that actions were wrong. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm trying to learn from this. Then learn this. Choices have consequences, and those consequences don't disappear just because you don't like them. You made choices that destroyed our marriage and your reputation. I made choices that documented and exposed your behavior. We're both living with the results. She nodded. The divorce papers will be filed next week. My attorney says the process should be completed within 60 days. Good. Clean breaks are better for everyone. I watched her walk away from the restaurant, probably for the last time. In 3 weeks, she'd gone from confident manipulation to complete defeat. She'd learned that lies have expiration dates, that documentation beats denial, and that some consequences can't be talked away. The story was over. Jessa would disappear to Denver and rebuild her life. Rory would deal with his own divorce and professional consequences. I would move forward with a clean slate and hard-earned wisdom about the importance of documentation and decisive action. Wednesday evening, I was cleaning out the last of Jessa's belongings when I found a handwritten letter tucked inside one of her law journals. It was dated 3 months ago, apparently never sent. Kai, I know you suspect something is wrong between us, and you're right. I've been seeing someone else, and I think I'm falling in love with him. I don't know how to tell you this without destroying everything we've built together. I keep thinking that maybe if I just end it with him, we can go back to the way things were. But I don't think I want to go back. I think I want something different, something that makes me feel alive in a way that our marriage doesn't anymore. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen, but I can't pretend it hasn't. I don't know what to do. The letter explained everything. She'd been planning to leave me for months, but couldn't figure out how to do it without looking like the villain. The affair with Rory wasn't just physical. She'd convinced herself it was true love. Her text message on Monday night hadn't been a moment of reckless honesty. It had been the culmination of months of internal struggle. In a strange way, the letter made me feel better about everything that had happened. Jessa hadn't just made a mistake or gotten carried away in a moment of weakness. She'd made a deliberate choice to pursue another relationship while staying married to me. She'd chosen deception over honesty, manipulation over communication. I'd responded to her choices with choices of my own. Documentation over denial, action over passivity, consequences over forgiveness. I tore up the letter and threw it away. Some secrets didn't need to be preserved. Thursday morning brought a final surprise, a text message from Catherine Veldon. Mr. Dornell, I wanted to thank you again for providing the evidence I needed for my divorce proceedings. Rory has agreed to a settlement that gives me everything I asked for, plus additional compensation for his infidelity. Your documentation made it impossible for him to deny or minimize his behavior. I hope you find peace and happiness in your new life. I smiled and deleted the message. Justice had been served all around. Jessa was facing the consequences of her choices. Rory was paying for his pattern of infidelity, and I was free to build whatever life I wanted. That evening, I stood at my living room window, looking out over Boston Harbor as the sun set behind the city skyline. The apartment felt different now, not empty, but clean, like a space that had been cleared of clutter and was ready for new possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from Marv. Drink to celebrate? You officially survived your first marriage. I texted back, make it 2 drinks. I want to toast the documentation. The war was over. I'd won not through violence or cruelty, but through preparation, documentation, and decisive action. I'd proven that truth, properly presented, was more powerful than lies, no matter how skillfully told. Jessa had taught me that some people will choose deception over honesty, manipulation over communication, selfishness over commitment. But I'd taught her something too, that choices have consequences, that lies have expiration dates, and that some people are much better at playing hardball than they initially appear. The apartment was mine. The truth was public. The future was unwritten. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough.